You hear him before you see him. That's what the soldier said afterward, that deep in the valley of Elah, before he even stepped out from the Philistine camp, the ground shook. Not from an earthquake, not from thunder, from footsteps. His name was Goliath. And if you think you know this story, I want you to stop right there. Because we've shrunk this man in our minds. We've made him comfortable. We've turned him into a cartoon villain that a lucky boy defeats with a lucky throw. He was not a cartoon. The Bible gives us his measurements with almost clinical precision. 6 cubits and a span. That's 9 feet 9 inches tall. Nearly 10 feet of human being walking toward you. A man so large that his armor alone weighed 125 pounds. His spear had a 15-pound iron tip. Look at the person next to you. Now stack 3 of them. That's Goliath. He came from Gath, one of the 5 great Philistine cities. And in Gath, they knew how to build warriors from the ground up. They had iron when everyone else still used bronze. They had chariots and military organization and weapons technology that Israel simply couldn't match. Goliath wasn't just a big man who happened to be intimidating. He was the product of an entire civilization's military machine, trained since childhood, equipped with the best weapons his people could produce, shaped by every battle and victory into the most terrifying weapon they had. Destroy. That was the assignment. That was the only assignment. He wore a bronze helmet, bronze armor head to foot, bronze on his legs, a javelin across his shoulders. And walking in front of him was his shield bearer, a full-sized soldier whose only job was to carry a shield too heavy for anyone else to manage. Think about that. Goliath had an assistant just for his equipment. For 40 days, this man walked into the valley between the 2 armies. Every morning, every evening, like clockwork, like a nightmare that kept returning. And every time he shouted the same challenge, "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he kills me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him, you will serve us. I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man." Silence. Every time, silence. 40 days of silence. Because on the other side of that valley, the army of Israel stood there and felt something the Bible describes in a single word: terror. Let me tell you about the man who should have answered that challenge. His name was Saul, king of Israel, taller than any man in his army. A warrior, chosen by God, anointed by the prophet Samuel. On paper, everything you could want in a leader. But Saul had a problem. Actually, Saul had several problems. But the one that mattered most right now, in this valley, watching Goliath walk out for the 40th consecutive morning, Saul was afraid. Not nervous, not cautious, terrified, the same word the Bible uses for his soldiers, it uses for their king. And a terrified king is perhaps the most dangerous thing in the world, because fear at the top flows downward like water. It saturates everything. The commanders fear because the king fears. The soldiers fear because the commanders fear. An entire army becomes paralyzed because the one person who should move forward can't take the first step. The camp becomes a place of dread and whispered conversations that trail off whenever someone with authority walks by. Saul's story is a tragedy. There's no other word for it. He started with everything and spent years slowly losing it, not to enemies, not to bad luck, but to his own choices, his own pride, his own inability to fully trust in something bigger than himself. The prophet Samuel had once looked him in the eye and said words Saul had been carrying ever since, like a stone in his chest. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." Rejected. That word echoes differently when you're still wearing the crown. So here was Saul, watching the giant walk out for the 40th time. Somewhere deep in him, he knew. He knew this was his moment. This was what a king was for. But he couldn't move. Instead, he offered a prize, the desperate move of a leader who has stopped leading. The man who kills the giant will receive great wealth. He will marry the king's daughter. His family will never pay taxes again. Silence. Wealth, a princess, tax-free for life. Still silence. That tells you everything. For 40 days, the greatest reward Saul could offer wasn't enough to move a single soldier one step forward into that valley. But 3 days' walk away, a boy was leaving home. His name was David. I want to introduce him to you properly. not as a future king, not as the hero you already know. Forget the marble statue for a moment. He was a teenager, 15, maybe 16. The youngest of 8 brothers from Bethlehem, a small town nobody put on important maps. His job, the thing he did every single day, was watch sheep. Sounds peaceful. Sometimes it was. Long stretches of silence on hillsides, writing songs, playing the harp, sleeping under stars so bright you felt you could reach up and rearrange them. But shepherding also meant something else, because sheep are completely defenseless. They cannot fight, they cannot run fast, they cannot hide. They are slow-moving packages of meat with legs, and every predator in the Judean wilderness knew it. Lions came, bears came, David fought both. He tells us himself with a calm that makes it more unsettling. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. He grabbed a lion by the mane, killed it. This is who David was. Not a trained soldier, not armored, not part of any army. Just a boy alone on a hillside who refused to let the things in his care be destroyed on his watch. But there was something else about David, something more important than physical courage. He believed something most people around him had forgotten. He believed that the God of Israel was actually real. Not ceremonially real, not politely real. Actually, specifically, practically present, involved, paying attention, capable of flowing through a shepherd boy's arm with enough force to stop a charging lion. He knew what that felt like, that surge of something that was definitely not his own strength. He would need to remember it. And David wasn't supposed to be there. This is important. The battle, the valley, the 40 days of terror, none of it was David's assignment. His 3 oldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were soldiers in Saul's army, stationed at the valley of Elah. They had heard the challenge every day. Every single day for 40 days, they had stood on that hillside and heard Goliath's voice and done nothing. David was home, watching sheep, the same job he had always done, the job nobody else wanted. One morning, his father Jesse called him in from the fields. "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers at the camp," he said, "and take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing and bring back some word from them." That was it, the entire assignment. A food delivery. Check on your brothers. Come home safely. David left early in the morning, left the sheep with another shepherd, and started the 3-day walk to the valley of Elah. He arrived to find the army moving out to their battle positions, shouting the war cry. David left his supplies with the keeper of supplies, a practical, organized act that tells you something about the kind of person he was even in moments of excitement, and ran toward the battle line looking for his brothers. And then he heard it for the very first time, Goliath's voice rolling across that valley like the sound of a mountain deciding to speak. The Bible is careful about what it tells us next. It says the Israelite men, when they saw Goliath and heard his challenge, fled from him in great fear. They ran from the battle line. And the Bible does not say that about David. Instead, David turned to the men standing nearby and asked a question that must have sounded bizarre coming from a teenager who had just arrived with a food delivery. "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Notice what David called it. Not a tactical problem, not an insurmountable military challenge, a disgrace, an insult. And Goliath himself, not a giant, not invincible, just a man outside the covenant, just a man. The soldiers around him repeated Saul's offer, great wealth, the king's daughter, tax exemption for life. David kept asking the same question, who does this man think he is? His oldest brother Eliab heard him, Eliab, the tall. A handsome, impressive firstborn, the one that the prophet Samuel had almost anointed king before God redirected him. Eliab had been standing in this valley for 40 days, and here came his little brother with a basket of bread, asking questions that made everyone else uncomfortable. "Why have you come down here?" Eliab demanded, voice sharp with older brother authority. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." There it was, the dismissal, the minimizing. You're a shepherd boy, not a soldier. You're here to watch, not to act. Your motives are wrong. Your heart is wicked. Go home. Years of being the youngest, years of being left with the animals while the important men did important things. Years of being overlooked and underestimated by the very people who should have known him best. David's response is three of the most quietly dignified words in the Bible. Now what have I done? And then he turned away from his brother. No argument, no defense, no tears, no lengthy explanation of his motives. He simply turned away from the dismissal and kept asking his question, because the question was more important than his brother's opinion of him. Word reached Saul. There's a boy in the camp asking who this Philistine thinks he is. Saul sent for him. David stood before the king. Look at this scene. Really look at it. On one side, Saul, tallest man in Israel, anointed ruler, surrounded by advisors, commanders, the full weight of royal authority. A man who had fought battles, won victories, worn the crown for years. On the other side, David, a teenager, probably still had dust from the road on his sandals, had come to deliver bread and cheese, was not in the army, had never fought in a war. And David said, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul looked at the boy standing before him. You cannot go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. It was an honest response, not unkind, not mocking, just realistic. You're young. He's experienced. These are not the same thing. But David didn't retreat. And what he said next is the entire theological heart of this story, the thing that separates it from every other underdog narrative ever told. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Stop there. David is not saying, I'm brave enough, I'm strong enough, I believe in myself. Watch me. He's saying, I have evidence. The God I serve has a track record. When the lion came on the hillside, God showed up. When the bear came, God showed up again. Not luck, not skill, proof. And I am walking into this valley with the same God who showed up on those hillsides. This is faith built on evidence, not wishful thinking. Documented, tested, personal faith. Saul looked at this boy, at this certainty that was somehow more solid than any armor in his tent, and Saul said, Go, may the Lord be with you. Then he tried to dress David in his own armor, his tunic, his bronze coat, his helmet, his sword. David strapped it all on and tried to walk. He couldn't move. I can't go in these, David said quietly. I'm not used to them. He took them off, every piece, because David didn't need Saul's way of fighting. Saul's armor hadn't moved one step toward that valley in 40 days. David walked to the stream. He reached in and picked up 5 smooth stones. He put them in his shepherd's bag. He took his sling in his hand, and he walked toward the giant. Goliath saw him coming. The Philistine champion, fully armed, shield-bearer walking ahead of him, looked across the valley and saw his opponent approaching, a boy with a stick. The Bible says when Goliath saw David, he despised him. That word, despised. Isn't there's contempt in it? There is almost offense in it. Like Goliath had been asking for 40 days for someone worthy, someone to make this mean something, and this is what they sent? A child? With a shepherd's staff and a pouch at his side? He looked at David, this teenager who had come to deliver cheese and ended up volunteering for the most dangerous assignment in the ancient world, and he laughed. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And then he did what every bully does when they sense the power difference is overwhelming. He cursed. He invoked his gods against this boy. He made it ugly and personal and spiritual. Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. I want you to feel the weight of that moment, 2 armies watching from hillsides on both sides. Thousands of men frozen in place. The valley between them silent except for the sound of wind, the distant lowing of animals, and the footsteps of one boy walking forward. The giant is covered head to foot in bronze. He has a spear with a 15-pound iron tip. He has a shield-bearer walking ahead of him. He has a lifetime of victory and a voice that makes birds scatter from trees half a mile away. The boy has 5 stones and a piece of leather. And the boy speaks. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He isn't whispering this. He isn't saying it to himself for private courage. He's saying it across the valley where every soldier on both hillsides can hear every word. Teeth, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down and cut off your head, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. Then one more thing. The sentence that separates this from every other battle speech in history. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. The battle is the Lord's, not mine, not ours, not David's, not Israel's, the Lord's. David was not a boy who believed he could win. He was a boy who understood he was not the one fighting. He was just the one who had shown up, the one who had refused to stay on the hillside while the insult continued, the one who had taken the 5 stones from the stream and made himself available. That's all. Just available. Goliath moved toward David. David ran toward Goliath. The Bible is very specific about this. Not walked, not advanced, ran toward the largest, most heavily armed, most feared warrior that anyone in that valley had ever seen or ever would see. David ran toward him. He reached into his shepherd's bag. He pulled out 1 stone, just 1, from the 5 he had selected. He loaded it into the leather cup of his sling. The sling began to move, that circular motion that shepherds practice until it becomes as natural as breathing, the stone gaining speed with each rotation, the leather cords humming through the air. He released. A practiced slinger with a good stone can achieve velocities of 100 to 150 feet per second. At 40 meters, accurate to within inches. The stone doesn't arc like a thrown rock. It travels in a nearly flat line, but faster than the eye can follow. It struck Goliath in the center of the forehead, the one small area not covered by his bronze helmet, the one gap in all that armor. Goliath didn't stagger. He didn't take a step back. He fell forward, face first, with the full weight of 9 feet and 300 pounds of armored warrior, and the ground shook when he hit. That sound. Both armies heard it. The valley went completely silent. Thousands of men on both hillsides, not one of them breathing. David walked to the fallen giant. He had no sword. The Bible mentions this carefully. He had no sword of his own, so he reached down and drew Goliath's own sword from its sheath. He stood over the man who had defied the armies of the living God for 40 days. He used Goliath's own sword to cut off Goliath's head. But when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they ran. And the army of Israel, which had been frozen in terror for 40 days, which hadn't moved from its positions on the hillside for 40 mornings of insults and challenges, they found their voices, they shouted, the valley rang with it, and they chased. Most tellings of this story end right there. Boy kills giant. Crowd cheers, everyone goes home, the end. But that's not where this story ends, not even close. Because what happens after that stone lands is in many ways more interesting, more human, more complicated, and more relevant to your actual life than the moment of triumph itself. Saul brought David into his court, promoted him, made him a military commander. David was brilliant at everything they gave him, won every battle, earned the love of the people, formed with Saul's son Jonathan, a friendship so deep the Bible calls it a bond of soul to soul. For a while, things were good. Then one day, returning from battle, the women of the cities came out singing and celebrating. Their song went, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Simple lyrics, a crowd celebration, probably not intended as a political statement. Saul heard it, and something inside him broke. They credit David with tens of thousands, and me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? Notice that. Saul didn't think. What a remarkable young man. He didn't think, God is blessing Israel through him. He went immediately to the worst possible interpretation and started doing the math on his own replacement. From that day, the Bible says, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. But the very next day, an evil spirit came upon Saul. David was playing the harp to soothe him. the way he often did, the music of the shepherd boy calming the troubled king. And suddenly Saul raised his spear and threw it across the room, twice. David dodged both times. Then Saul sent assassins to David's house. His own son Jonathan warned David and helped him escape through a window. Saul hunted him through the wilderness for years. David lived in caves with a band of outcasts and misfits and desperate men who gathered around him, everyone who was in distress, in debt, in bitterness of soul. Not exactly a royal court, the shepherd boy who became Israel's hero was now a fugitive in the very country he had saved. But here's what I find most extraordinary about those years of running. On twice, David had Saul completely in his power. The first time, Saul walked alone into a cave where David and his men were hiding in the darkness. The man who had been trying to kill David for years was now unaware, vulnerable, 10 feet away in the dark. David's men whispered, "This is the moment. God has delivered him into your hands." David crept forward. He cut off the corner of Saul's robe, and then he stopped. His conscience struck him. Even then, even after everything, he could not bring himself to harm the king that God had anointed, regardless of what that king had done to him. He let Saul walk out. When Saul was safely at a distance, David called out. He held up the piece of cloth. He showed what he could have done. Saul broke down weeping. "You are more righteous than I," the king sobbed. "You treated me well while I treated you badly." Then Saul went home. Then Saul came after David again. The second time, David crept into Saul's sleeping camp at night, the entire army asleep around him. He found the king, spear planted in the ground at his head. His companion said, "One thrust, let me end this." David said no. He took the spear, he took the water jug, he walked away. 2 chances, both refused, not from weakness, from principle, from a deep conviction that he would not seize by violence what God had promised to give him in time. He would wait, he would not become the thing that was hunting him. Years later, David became king, the greatest king Israel ever had. He built an empire, wrote psalms that billions of people still read, established Jerusalem as the holy city. His name would become synonymous with courage and faith for 3,000 years and counting. But Goliath was not the last giant David faced. The giants that came later wore different shapes: jealousy wearing a crown and throwing spears, loneliness in a cave with no horizon in sight, betrayal from the people he loved most, moral failure in a moment of weakness on a palace rooftop that he would carry the rest of his life. David didn't defeat all of them. I need to say that clearly. He didn't. He fell in ways that caused tremendous damage. He made choices that haunted him and everyone around him for decades. The man who had stood in the valley with 5 stones in perfect faith also stood on a rooftop years later and chose badly, and the consequences were catastrophic. The psalms he wrote in those years are not victory songs. They are the prayers of a man in anguish, on his knees, reaching back for the God who had been with him in the field, and begging that God not to withdraw. "Have mercy on me, God, according to your unfailing love. Wash away all my guilt and cleanse me from my sin, for I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me." And God, after everything, knowing everything, seeing all of it, still called him a man after his own heart. Not a perfect man, not a man without failure or darkness or terrible contradiction, not a man who got everything right or faced every giant without flinching. A man after his heart. Because what made David who he was, from beginning to end, was never the absence of giants. It was what he did when he saw them. He ran toward them instead of away. He stood in the valley and said, "The battle is not mine, and it's the Lord's, and I am here." And when he fell, he got back up and found his way back to the same God who had sent him into the valley in the first place. He never stopped believing that the God who had been on the hillside was the same God who was in the valley and in the cave and in the palace and in the darkest moments of his own failure. Same God, every landscape, every chapter. Your giant doesn't care how big you are. It cares about who sent you. So let me ask you something before we end. What's your valley? What has been standing there, walking out every morning, shouting your name, daring you to take a step forward, for 40 days or 40 months or 40 years? What thing in your life has been demanding a response that you haven't been able to give yet? Not because you don't know what the right response is, but because the size of it made you take a step backward instead. And what armor have people tried to put on you? Whose method, whose system, whose way of fighting have you strapped on and found that you couldn't move in it because it wasn't yours? Because it was built for someone else's body and someone else's battle? Take it off. You don't need it. You need to go as yourself, with what you already have, with what you've practiced on hillsides that nobody was watching, with the skills you developed in the quiet years when you were just the youngest one left with the animals, with the songs you wrote when no one was listening, with the track record that only you and God can fully see. Because you have a track record, even if it doesn't look like one from the outside. Think about it carefully. Think about the moments where something got you through that should not have gotten you through. The times where you were in the pit and something held you together that had no business holding you together. The bear, the lion. Your bear and your lion, whatever form they came in, whatever hillside they found you on. That's your evidence. Catalog it. Remember it. Write it down if you have to. Because when your giant starts walking toward you and every voice around you is telling you that you're too young or too small or too inexperienced or too broken or too ordinary, you are going to need to remember that you have already survived things that were supposed to destroy you. And then, and this is the most important thing I can tell you, run. Don't edge forward cautiously. Don't test the water with one toe. So don't look for the exit before you fully commit. Don't let Eliab's voice, whether it comes from outside you or from inside, make you turn around when you're already walking toward the valley. Run. Because the battle is the Lord's. And he has a persistent, documented habit of showing up for the people who actually show up first. David didn't become king because he killed a giant. He didn't get the crown as a reward for one extraordinary afternoon in one extraordinary valley. He became king because for years afterward, through caves and wilderness and injustice and running and grief, he kept holding on to the thing that had sent him running into that valley in the first place. He believed. Even when everything around him made belief look ridiculous, even when Saul was hunting him through the wilderness, even when he was living in a cave, even when he had failed in ways he could not undo, he kept reaching back. Same God. Always the same God. The fire's down to embers now. But before you go, sit with this for just a moment. You already know what your valley is. You've known this whole time I was talking. And you already know what you've been given to walk into it with. The only question is whether you'll take off the armor that doesn't fit, pick up the stones from the stream, and run. He doesn't send you in alone. He never has. He never will.